Welcome back to the deep dive. Tonight we are tackling, well, maybe the biggest question there is, the one that kind of sits behind everything else. Tonight we ask that very human question. What happens to us after we die?
Yeah, it's the ultimate curiosity, isn't it? We're drawing from some really rich, diverse sources today. I mean, everything from tiny molecules
Yeah.
all the way up to grand cosmic ideas about existence itself. We're going from mitochondria to meaning. We'll touch on biology, philosophy, faith, and even what Nobel laureate Venki Ramakrishnan thinks about, trying to bend the curve of human mortality.
Okay, so our mission for you today is to try and weave all this together. We've got molecular biology, physics, these really striking lived experiences, ancient beliefs, and the idea is to give you a really informed but also balanced picture. Hopefully you'll walk away with some surprising stuff and maybe a bit more perspective.
Right. We've sort of laid out a path for this.
Yeah.
We'll start with the hard biology aging, death, mostly through that molecular lens. Then we'll look at those, well, strange reports from people who came really close to death. From there, we can branch out into some older philosophical maps of what existence might be. And finally, we'll get into the new longevity tech, the ethics around it, and that sort of cosmic context Neil deGrasse Tyson often brings in.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting with the science bit. When we say death today, scientifically, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, fundamentally, it's the irreversible loss, the loss of an individual's capacity to function as a coherent whole. Historically, we just thought heart stops, that's it.
Yeah.
But modern medicine keeps pushing those boundaries. Now the focus is really shifting more towards irreversible brain death. It's become more complex.
And leading up to that final point, there's aging. And it's kind of startling, isn't it, when scientists like Venki Ramakrishnan point out that aging doesn't just start when we're, middle-aged. It starts way, way earlier.
That's right. The process actually kicks off in utero. And the core idea isn't necessarily some kind of biological death clock. It's more like a cascade failure. Damage accumulates, things change. We spend our whole lives basically repairing ourselves. But that repair system, well, it just gradually gets less efficient over time.
So the body's maintenance crew gets tired, maybe a bit sloppy as the decades go by. Can we break down some of the hallmarks of that decay in simple terms?
Yeah, we can definitely point to a few key molecular culprits. So think about the mitochondria. These are like the cell's power plants, right? They make the energy. But there's a byproduct. Making that energy also creates reactive oxygen species, free radicals. And these can damage stuff around them in the cell.
Ah, okay. So it's like the power plant is essential, but its exhaust is slowly damaging the factory building itself.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Then another big one is damage to proteins. Proteins do most of the work in the cell. Over time, their quality control slips. They can misfold, clump together, aggregate. And this is a really big deal in the brain. Think of the tangles you see in Alzheimer's disease.
And then there are the ones I find fascinating, the senescent cells? The zombie cells, if I get this right, they're damaged, so they stop dividing, which is good, maybe. But then they stick around and actively cause trouble.
Precisely. They don't die, hence the zombie name. Instead, they start secreting these inflammatory compounds. It's like they're sending out constant alarm signals. Now, early in life, this might actually be helpful, maybe helps clear out potential cancer cells. But later on, as they build up, all these signals create chronic low-level inflammation throughout the body. It's called inflammaging. And we actually saw how bad the systemic inflammation could be. It was noted as a big factor in severe COVID deaths. It shows how destructive their buildup can become.
Okay, so all this sort of suggests we aren't necessarily programmed to die on a schedule, but maybe evolution just favored being strong and healthy during our reproductive years.
That's pretty much the standard evolutionary logic, yeah. Evolution selects for traits that help pass on genes, not necessarily for living forever. So genes that give us an edge when we're young might have, downsides later in life. And then if you pull back, way back to the cosmic scale, as someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson often reminds us, the universe itself tends towards entropy, disorder, gradual decay. Living things are amazing pockets of order fighting against entropy, but only, locally and temporarily. We need constant energy input to keep it going.
Right. Makes the body sound like this incredibly complex machine that's ultimately still subject to the basic laws of physics, just very slowly.
It is, which naturally leads us to the next question. Can we intervene? Can we find an external fix, this whole quest for more time? But it's important to clarify, when researchers talk about anti-aging, they're usually not promising immortality. The focus is generally on something more practical,
Which is extending our health span, right?
Right.
Not just adding years, but adding healthy years.
That's the crucial distinction. Yeah.
Yeah.
The goal isn't just a longer decline. It's maximizing the time we live vigorously, healthily, and then maybe compressing that period of decline right at the end. The sort of ideal scenario, metaphorically, is like the one-hoss shay. Everything works perfectly until it all stops at once. A long, healthy life, then a relatively quick exit.
So what interventions actually show promise, at least in the lab? We hear a lot about lifestyle stuff, things that mimic certain biochemical states.
Well, the most solid evidence, at least in animals, comes from caloric restriction, CR. Seriously cutting calories extends life in lots of species. Problem is, for humans, it's incredibly hard to stick to long term. So the big challenge is finding ways to mimic the biochemistry of that near starvation state, things involving pathways like insulin growth factor, using drugs, often called mimetics. Venki Ramakrishnan points out, the dream is basically getting the molecular benefits of fasting while, still enjoying your life. We're definitely not there yet with an easy pill.
Okay. And then there's research that goes deeper, right to the level of how cells are controlled.
Reprogramming. Yeah, cellular reprogramming. This often involves using what are called Yamanaka factors. The idea is to partially reset the epigenome, those molecular tags that tell our genes what to do. In animal studies, these partial resets do seem to rejuvenate tissue sometimes. But, and this is a big but, for humans, the safety concerns are huge. Getting it to the right cells is hard, and if you reset too much,
Tumors.
yeah, a serious risk of causing cancer is incredibly powerful, potentially, but also really delicate, very early days for human applications.
And we should probably mention the more headline-grabbing ideas, like the vampire blood research. Ah, right. The blood factors research. This comes from studies called parabiosis, where they surgically join the circulatory systems of an old animal and a young animal. And yeah, the old animal often shows signs of rejuvenation. But importantly, the young animal often shows signs of accelerated aging, which strongly suggests there are factors in the blood that influence aging, both ways. Researchers are trying to isolate those specific factors, figure out what they are. But unfortunately, this has already led to, well, a kind of dubious market for young blood transfusions in humans with absolutely no solid proof they work.
So, okay, even if we could achieve significant health span extension, the ethical questions are just massive the moment these things become reality, assuming they're expensive. Who gets them? Exactly. That's the immediate concern, the longevity divide. If these treatments cost a fortune, does wealth suddenly dictate lifespan even more starkly than it already does? But it gets even more complicated. Think about societal structures. If people routinely live for, say, 150 or 200 healthy years, what happens to careers, pensions, power structures? If influence and wealth just keep accumulating with the same long-lived individuals for centuries, you could get real social stagnation, couldn't you? Imagine the founder of some huge company sticking around for 300 years. Where's the room for new ideas, new leadership? It's a huge question. Does society lose dynamism? Does it block younger generations? And then there are the resource implications: climate, food, water, space. Venki's take on this, which feels very grounded, is really about focusing on measurable health span improvements that could benefit everyone. Focusing on outcomes, not getting lost in the hype or magical thinking about defeating death for a privileged few.
Mechanisms don't automatically give meanings, but they can buy us time. Okay, now, this is where it gets really interesting, I think. We shift from the biological machinery of death to the edge of that experience itself, near-death experiences, NDEs.
Right, NDEs. These are these conscious, vivid experiences people report when they're close to dying, or sometimes clinically dead for a short time, like during cardiac arrest. And what's truly striking is how similar the core elements of these reports often are across totally different cultures, different backgrounds, different beliefs.
So what are some of those common themes, those motifs that keep cropping up?
Well, there's often the out-of-body experience, the OBE, feeling detached from the physical body, maybe seeing it from a vantage point above, like near the ceiling. Often a sense of moving through a tunnel or a darkness towards a brilliant, often described as loving light. And an overwhelming feeling of peace, of unconditional love. People describe it like being enveloped in warmth, like a hug.
But maybe the most impactful part for many seems to be the life review.
Yeah, this one is profound. It's not usually like watching a movie of your life. The key thing reported is feeling the emotional consequences of your actions, but from the perspective of the other person involved. So you might re-experience a moment of kindness and feel the joy it brought someone else. And then maybe moments later, feel the sharp pain you caused someone through a past action, as if you were them.
Yeah.
That kind of perspective shift, it often leads to huge personal changes afterward. People report losing their fear of death, becoming much more focused on compassion, interconnectedness.
There's that powerful account from Nancy Ryan. She identified as an atheist, very analytical, and then her heart stopped during surgery.
Right. Nancy Ryan's story is compelling because she described her own analytical mind observing the experience. She thought, okay, this isn't the oblivion I expected as an atheist, but it's also not the hellfire some religions talk about. She reported this profound sense of being welcomed, of love, and this feeling that her earth life was somehow temporary, maybe even illusory, and this state felt like being home. And interestingly, her physical recovery was reported to be much faster than doctors predicted, weeks instead of months. Her whole outlook on life shifted towards gratitude and connection.
Okay, so we have these incredibly consistent, often life-changing reports. How does science, which is grounded in the material brain, try to make sense of them?
Yeah, the materialist perspective is really important here for balance. While you can't deny the power of the subjective experience, science looks for potential biological correlates. For instance, some altered states, like the tunnel vision and bright lights sometimes seen in pilots experiencing oxygen loss due to G-forces, GLOC, share some superficial features with NDEs.
But not the deep meaning or transformation.
Generally, no. GLOC doesn't typically come with that sense of profound peace, love, or the life review. So while there might be overlapping physiological effects, it doesn't fully explain the NDE package.
And there's newer research looking directly at brain activity during the dying process itself, right?
Yes, this is fascinating, though still very early. Studies monitoring brain activity in patients after cardiac arrest have found something unexpected. Instead of the brain just shutting down, they've detected these brief, intense bursts of gamma wave activity. Gamma waves are usually associated with higher cognitive functions, consciousness, attention, memory recall.
So the brain might actually become hyperactive for a short period.
It seems possible. Connectivity between brain regions involved in conscious experience, memory retrieval, even empathy appears to surge briefly as the person is physiologically dying. It's like the brain might be generating a final, highly complex cognitive event.
Which leaves us still straddling that line. One model says the mind is just what the brain does. Another suggests the brain might be more like a receiver or filter for consciousness. And tonight, we're sort of holding both possibilities lightly. This need to understand what happens next, map existence beyond the body. It's certainly not new. How have different cultures tackled this?
Oh, absolutely. Throughout history, cultures have developed really sophisticated frameworks. If you look at some traditional African cosmologies, for example, death often isn't seen as an endpoint, but more as a transition. The deceased become the living dead. They're still considered part of the community, still active, just in a different form, maintaining connections.
And then in the major Indian religions, you get these strong themes of cycles, consequence, rebirth.
Right. In Hinduism, there's the concept of the Atman, the eternal individual consciousness or self, which survives death. It's thought to be carried by a subtle body, the Luga Sharira, which holds the accumulated karma, the weight of past actions and tendencies. This karma then determines the nature of the next rebirth. The Atman essentially takes on a new body, kind of like changing clothes.
And Buddhism has a related idea, but with a really key difference about the self, right?
Exactly. Buddhism teaches anatta, no fixed, permanent, unchanging self or soul. So rebirth happens, but it's not a thing migrating. It's more about causal continuity, pakkasamuppada. Think of it like one candle lighting another. The flame passes on, driven by the cause, the first candle, or past actions. But it's not the same flame. The aggregates that make up a person, form, feeling, perception, etc., reassemble based on past karma, but there's no unchanging soul moving between lives.
Moving over to the Abrahamic faiths, like Orthodox Christianity, there's sometimes an interpretation of heaven and hell that's less about geography.
Yes, that's a really interesting theological perspective. It suggests heaven and hell aren't necessarily different places, but different ways of experiencing the same reality. The increasing presence of God, or divine love. For a soul aligned with love, that intense presence is blissful, paradise. For a soul turned inward, focused on self or negativity, that very same divine presence is experienced as painful, like a consuming fire. It's about the state of the soul, not the location.
Okay, let's circle back briefly to physics and philosophy. We mentioned materialism, mind equals brain. What about ideas from physics about time itself?
Well, this gets into some mind-bending territory with the block universe concept, which emerges from Einstein's theory of relativity. Because space and time are interwoven into space-time and because simultaneity is relative, this view suggests that past, present, and future all exist equally, timelessly, within this four-dimensional block. So in a sense, the information pattern that constitutes you truly vanishes from the block, just receives into what we perceive as the past. Your life is eternally there in space-time.
And building on that, there's a more controversial philosophical idea about consciousness itself persisting.
Right. This is sometimes called generic subjectivity or open individualism. It's the idea that maybe your fundamental identity isn't the specific person, but consciousness itself.
Hmm.
Since consciousness clearly continues to exist in the universe, in other beings, maybe your subjective awareness doesn't actually cease, but simply continues without a gap through whatever consciousness exists next. You don't reincarnate as someone specific, but the awareness continues. The ethical takeaway some draw from this is profound. If we all share one underlying consciousness, then all suffering and all joy is, in a sense, shared. It binds us together.
Wow. Okay, so we've gone from molecular machines and zombie cells to these bursts of gamma waves and dying brains, NDEs, ancient cosmologies, and even the idea of our lives existing timelessly in space-time.
Right.
It's a lot.
It really is. And navigating all this, especially when thinking about loss and mortality, really requires compassion. For ourselves, for others. We need to normalize that grief looks different for everyone. Things like community, rituals, having support, they matter hugely. And while the longevity science is intriguing, it's worth remembering that the best proven ways to boost your health span right now are often the simple things.
Yeah, things like getting enough sleep, moving your body regularly, nurturing relationships, finding a sense of purpose. The evidence for those is actually stronger, more reliable than for most of the, longevity hacks being sold out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So whether you lean towards faith or science or maybe just an honest, I really don't know, your questions, your curiosity, it's all valid here.
And maybe here's a final thought to take with you. If life were truly eternal, if death wasn't part of the equation, would it lose some of its meaning? Does the fact that our time is finite actually give value and urgency to the moments we have right now? Thanks for listening to this deep dive. Stay gentle with yourselves, stay curious, and stay tuned for the next one.